Instead of my usual introduction, I'm going to do things a little differently. Undertale is a game that's made so much better by going into it completely blind. Besides checking out a trailer, I'd really recommend playing the game before watching a review on it. If you enjoy classic RPGs along the lines of Earthbound, you'll love Undertale. If you enjoy classic RPGs and thought Earthbound was overrated, you'll love Undertale. Seriously, go play Undertale. Go! But then come back and see what I have to say about it. Playing Undertale is nowhere near the same as watching it. Oh, and pretty much any conversation about Undertale is a spoiler, so here's an initial warning. Also, it's worth mentioning that Undertale is a game that has to be seen through to the end, where the culmination of what it truly is comes to a head. I'll drop another warning before going into any super spoilery stuff. Shall we then? Church here, and welcome to the Game Grinder. Today we'll be reviewing Undertale. Undertale was developed by indie developer Toby Fox. After looking around, I found that Toby was a member of the Earthbound fan site Starman.net that I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, and he gained some notability for his Earthbound Halloween hack. He was also a composer for the Homestuck webcomic, but I'm not really familiar with that series. Undertale already had a working demo of the first segment of the game when it first went to crowdfunding in June of 2013. He had initially planned on a smaller project to be released within a year with a funding goal of $5,000, but raised about $51,000. With the additional backing, the game was expanded upon and was released in September of 2015 for PC and Mac via Steam. I'm sure by now many of you have at least heard mentions of the game, as its initial release was incredibly hyped. Game sites and forums were overwhelmed with talks of the game. Game FAQs even ended up having a poll where the game eventually was voted the top spot of their best game ever contest, which was partially a prank. Hype to this extent can always be worrisome and dismissed by us, as passing fads are usually just that, a fad. One thing though really caught my attention. On Steam, the PC and Mac go-to game distribution service, Undertale quickly became one of the highest rated games on their insanely massive library of games. It was sitting at 76 at the time of this review on Steam's chart. That was very telling to me. The online community is a cold, harsh mistress, and if something wasn't worth everyone's time, it wouldn't be getting the ratings and numbers it did. And then there were the reviews, overwhelmingly positive across the board. Of course, I was already playing plenty of other games, so I hadn't gotten to it until just recently. Holy shit, I'm sure glad I finally did. Undertale fits well into the indie scene of retro throwback games, and takes its place in the RPG genre, and immediately seeing screenshots of the game, you can tell it takes heavy inspiration from the Mother series, Earthbound in many ways. Style, some of its music, and it's focused on humor, but it's entirely its own original creation, and what a creation this is. Undertale on the surface appears to be an old-school RPG with a bizarre bullet hell-esque combat system, and one of its taglines is, "The friendly RPG where nobody has to die." Though true in the literal regards, and on the surface sounds straightforward, Undertale is so much more. To every light there must be dark, and holy shit is this game meta. It's worth knowing going into the game that there are multiple endings based on decisions throughout the game, and I'll get to more about this later. Let me just set up the story real quick, and then we'll talk about the gameplay before going into more about its story. When loading the game, we're prompted with an old-school feeling introduction to the story. A long time ago, humans and monsters were in conflict, and fearful of their powers, the humans managed to seal the monsters away underground. Jump forward to present times, and we'll see a child heading to an apparent cursed mountain, where nobody ever returns from. Falling down into a hole within, the child wakes at what appears to be ruins deep below the earth. Making our way down the corridor, we'll encounter a flower. Flowey the flower to be exact. Flowey introduces us to how things work. We then enter the battle system. Our heart represents our soul. You'll notice the standard affair for provided stats. LV apparently stands for love, and by increasing it we'll grow stronger. Flowey then tries to convince us that these little white friendliness pellets will do just that. Being the oh-so-gullible people we are, once contacting one, well, it nearly kills us, and its form becomes twisted. Before it manages to land another blow, we're saved by a goat-like woman named Toriel, like tutorial. Get it? Anywho, we'll follow her and begin our journey. We're then introduced to the full battle system where she provides a dummy for us to practice on. She says that when getting into a fight, to strike up a friendly conversation, and this is one of the major aspects to Undertale in regards to gameplay and story. You'll notice once in battle, we'll have our standard fight and item commands, but we'll also have Act and Mercy. Act allows us to examine our opponent, or perform an action such as conversation, threaten, pet, or whatever else might be relevant to the monster we're facing. The goal with the Act command is to basically convince the monster that we don't want to fight, or possibly bore it into leaving, where we then can give Mercy and spare them. We can flee as well, but there are no rewards. Mercy at least provides gold, but no EXP. Additionally, and especially as the game progresses, this becomes more and more challenging, as we'll have to endure enemy attacks for every action we perform until they are dead, given Mercy, or we flee. Using Act may take a few more rounds to convince the monster, so again, we'll have to deal with their attacks. Now going back to where Flowey was showing us how things work, is how the defending against attack goes. We're able to freely move our soul within the confines of the box. Monsters will have a variety of often odd objects sent into the box to try to damage us. We can, however, dodge these objects, creatures, or whatever the hell might show up. When we attack a monster, we'll have a damage meter appear, and we'll have to hit a button when the lines pass through the middle of the gauge for maximum damage. Throughout the game, there are many areas where classic random battles will happen, and we can choose how they will proceed, whether through violence or compassion. Of course, we'll have plenty of boss battles to make our way through during the quest, and this is where things can get really crazy. How this bullet hell style gets mixed up throughout the game is incredibly unusual, but there's so much variety to every individual monster, and oftentimes it's just plain hilarious. Of course, we have the alternative of fighting, and with Undertale, we'll quickly find our power growing and are easily able to kill monsters. Being merciful can be a struggle, and we'll have to weigh our options, look within, and decide who we want to be. Regardless of the path we choose, falling in battle will happen, and it's the typical back to the save point feature of the JRPG. At the continue screen, we'll get an inspiring message from an unknown voice, encouraging us to stay determined. Speaking of saving, though pretty straightforward with the classic star indicator, and there is always an associated message that fills us with determination. The struggle is real, but fortunately we're provided with a variety of items to make use of. Of course, there will be weapons and clothing to help boost damage and defense, and shops contain a plethora of healing items, and some oddities. I was pretty surprised at some of the uselessness of certain items, but the trade-off was usually a good laugh. One small perk going the route of non-violence is since we don't gain any EXP, we don't level, and there's a handy 2-use healing item that's cheap and stays useful the entire game. Besides having a go-to healing item, that gives us extra money to spend on more important things. From the ruins we begin in, we'll be able to freely explore, though generally heading eastward. We'll have plenty of opportunity to visit towns for lore and shopping, backtracking is made pretty easy, eventually, and there's plenty to keep us entertained on the way. Undertale is full of secrets and Easter eggs, and it's pretty common to be able to find something hidden in many of the areas we visit. It's always worth poking around and talking to other monsters when the opportunity is present. You never know what you might find. With the game being story-focused, there's a lot of information to take in as we travel through the underground, and things begin to piece together as we make our way to our end goal. So on to some more spoilery stuff. This will be brief, sadly. As much as I'd like to, I'm not going to talk about Undertale's story in any depth. To do so in any meaningful way would require this review to be 2 to 3 times as long as it is, and frankly, I couldn't do it justice. Never judge a book by its cover, especially when we're talking about an indie game. As I said before, and I'm going to say it again, Undertale is definitely best enjoyed knowing as little as possible. I know the game can be enjoyed, spoilers or not, but why not make the most of your first playthrough? So, if you'd like to skip any further spoilers, skip ahead to the time listed, or click on the annotation. Let's move on then. The goal we've set out upon is to escape the underworld. As we learn while progressing though, there's a magical barrier that keeps the world separate. The only way to pass the barrier is with the soul of a human, and of course that means we may pass through. We eventually learn we'll have to meet the king of the underworld, Asgore, at the palace before we can reach the barrier. This is where things start to shift, and what we think we know might not be what it seems. Besides meeting, and possibly making some friends along the way, we'll get conflicting information about what to expect when it comes to Asgore. Along the way we'll meet and have the opportunity to befriend some of the notable underworld monsters. There's Sans, the joking skeleton who really is just super nice, but seems to have some serious insights to the world around him. We'll also meet his brother, Papyrus, the skeleton guardsman who's been tasked with capturing the human by Undyne. Undyne is a legendary hero for the monsters, and is also working to hunt down the human. Lastly, we'll meet Alphys, the resident scientist and otaku. We'll also discover Asgore seeks to capture the human soul, and use it to smash the barrier, trapping the monsters below. How this will all play out, again, depends on our actions. I mentioned before that Undertale has multiple endings. These are directly attributed to how we decide to play the game. The endings have been labeled neutral, pacifist, true neutral, and genocide. For my time spent during my playthrough, with minimal knowledge of the game, but knowing there was a pacifist ending, I went the route of non-violence. How things play out during each playthrough can be significantly different in regards to how the characters react to us, or if they can even react, including major story events, and even random encounters. I keep talking about how in-depth and twisting the story is, and it ain't no joke. One of the standout elements how it does this is related to saving, and replaying the game, either from a previous state or a new run. The game is aware of this, and it truly makes for some engaging experiences. I'm not going to summarize the story and its themes like I said, as there are others who have done it far, far better than anything I could ever do, so I'm going to refer you to one video in particular. I only discovered this channel when trying to further understand the story of Undertale. NitroRad did an incredible analysis of Undertale, and I'd encourage you to check out his video. I'll put a link in the description. I recommend checking it out for the synopsis after finishing this review. If you might never play this game, his video might change your mind. And again, watching Undertale and experiencing it for yourself are two vastly different things. Undertale's presentation, mainly its story and how it's told, the themes and messages within, are amazingly well done. The amount of depth in a game pretty much created by a single person is nothing short than mind-boggling. Appearance aside, Undertale manages to make choice significant. Your choices matter. There literally is permanence in what you do in the grand scheme of things in the game's entire story. Nothing short than literally altering the game's save files will forget what you've done with your time in the underground. I mentioned before the game being meta. What this means is in some unique ways, the game will identify choices and actions we perform regarding name choices, saving, replaying the game, and more. This is impressive, and I think that's an understatement. Its story is tragic, moving, and powerful all at the same time, and resonated with me more than I could have thought. Graphically, unless you can't handle 16-bit odd stylings, the game looks good to me and remains true to its inspiration. The areas we'll visit each have their own personality with plenty of detail, and obviously every Denzian in the underworld as well. Uniqueness is something that this game has in stride besides its unusual appearance at times. Undertale is also referential to other games besides the mother games, but I don't want to spoil the surprises. You might roll your eyes, but how the game does this is its charm. Then there's the soundtrack. Oh yeah, not only was the game developed and written by Toby Fox, he also composed the soundtrack. This is an awesome soundtrack. It was a very cool blend of 8-bit, 16-bit, and orchestral music that gives the game a powerful soundtrack to accompany the rest of its presentation. Much like the rest of the game, there's some pretty weird songs, but again, how the music is used adds to its overall charm. There's a lot of really risky choices here. A lot of ideas that sound like they could be really stupid, but you'd be wrong. So wrong. It works. Everything works so well. I'm not a bullet hell kind of gamer, but Undertale's spin on that element was a blast, and it was really funny at times. The presentation of the overall feeling of the game, the happy-go-lucky attitude, mentions of hope, friendship, love, are a big topic, I'll be honest. But as I said before, things aren't always as they appear. The story alone is so impressive that even weeks after finishing the game, I'm still thinking about it. At first I was iffy about the visual styles, you know, hipster shit, but this really transcends that sort of judgment. I love the soundtrack too. It's all sorts of win with these indie releases. Shovel Knight, Shantae, and many more. They're pushing genres in directions that we really thought they'd never go, and Undertale is definitely no exception. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. In fact, I'm redacting my pick of Fallout 4 as my best game of the year of 2015 and replacing it with Undertale. Believe the hype, and stay determined. Thanks for checking out my review of Undertale. What were your thoughts on the game? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked what you've seen or heard, please give the video a like, a share, and subscribe to see future videos. I'm on Facebook and Twitter as well, and I post a lot of other great game-related content there, and links are in the description. Until next time on the Game Grinder.